Hi, thank you for joining us today for our online workshop. We're doing Knitting Across the Nation from Airfield to Arran at Airfield Estate as part of Cruinniú na nÓg 2021. My name is Georgia and I will be teaching the natural dyeing and eco-printing workshop today. So we'll be using some plants and mostly plants, some that you might find in your back garden or kitchen, or maybe if you're out on a little walk somewhere. I'll be showing you how to coax colour from these things in order to dye fabric and yarn. So some of the this is the yarn that we'll be dyeing. This is Jacob's yarn from Airfield Estate, which is spun from the fleece of their very own sheep. So it's this lovely grey colour to start off, and I'll be showing you how to over dye it with some different pigments that we find. So we also have some little samples here. We'll be dyeing onto natural materials like linen, cotton, silk and wool using our natural dyes. So yeah, some of the colours that we've gotten here have been from things like nettles, tea, turmeric, which is a nice spice you might have in your kitchen. We also have blueberries and some different kinds of onion skins. So the next technique that we'll be exploring is called eco-printing. And eco-printing is an amazing way of getting really magical, exciting prints from different plants in your garden. So here are some examples. You get kind of nice little ghosty outlines, cool little shapes from the plants. So thank you very much for joining us, and if you have any questions during the workshop, please feel free to write them into the chat box and we'll try and get back to you during the workshop as soon as we can. Hi, so I am going to talk you through the equipment that you need to do some dyeing at home. So first things first, it's better to use equipment that you are not going to use for food anymore. So if your parents might have an old pot or something at home, that's a great option. Just because with our dyeing, we want to keep our dyeing equipment for just dyeing, because even though we're using lovely natural plant materials, sometimes there can be little chemicals leached out of them and into the pot or whatever that you're using. So just to start off and say that it is best practice to use your own specific pot and spoon for the dyeing materials. So after our pot, here's mine here, you're going to need some rubber gloves or something to protect your hands. These have a dual purpose because not only do they stop your skin from getting stained, because these dyes, they can dye wool, they'll dye your skin, and I've ended up with multicolored hands many, many times. So you want to protect the hands, and also they'll give you just a little bit of heat protection as well if you're holding onto the wool. So we also have some tongs here. They're very useful for giving your wool a little mix around in the pot and for taking it out also without scalding yourself or burning the hands, very important. Some spoons for stirring. So for mixing our dye through the pot so that we have a nice even take up of our dye. I have some measuring spoons here, which again specifically for dyeing can be useful if you're using natural dye extracts, or also for your mordants and different compounds that I will talk about a little bit later on. I have some string, always handy. Never have enough string around the place. And then also here are some of our little samples to dye. So I have our Airfield wool, our lovely Jacob's wool, and to dye we'll also have to bring that into a skein, so we'll make it just a little bit looser, which I'll talk about in more detail. Sometimes when you're dyeing with a new material, it's nice to just do a little bit to see what sort of colour you might get from the plants. So I have some little swatches here for experiments, and I'll talk you through some of the plant materials you might like to experiment with yourself at home. So the best thing about the natural dyeing is it's not too prescriptive. It's always a bit of an adventure, and it's always a bit of an exciting reveal at the end because you never know exactly what you're going to get. So some of the plants that you might want to try out are onions. Their skins give great colour. We have some lovely spinach here from the farm that will give a go. I've got this lovely little plant called Herb Robert, which grows all around the place. It's a little type of early geranium, which gives a lovely, lovely colour. And we have some nice ivy here. So I'll show you some of the ivy samples I have actually for growing. So ivy grows everywhere. You'll always see it growing up walls and in forests. You might have some even in your back garden. So here are some shades that I've gotten from the leaves. And then I've also gotten these purple colours from the berries, from the ivy berries. So that's a fun one to play around with. You might not even need to venture farther than your own kitchen. I've got these samples here from black tea. These ones are from turmeric powder, or you could use turmeric root. We've got our onion skins. This one's from lemon balm. So sometimes herbs can give really nice colours, so it's good to have a little play around with them. These samples are from blueberries, from frozen blueberries. So I've got a lovely bowl of them here. We'll be playing with them today. And then these three are from red onion skins. So it can be amazing what different colours that you can get from the same dye pot. So we'll be having a nice little play around with them. So another thing that's quite nice to do is someone had gotten me a bouquet of flowers, and after they went a bit wilty, I stuck them in a bag in the freezer. So those were just the frozen old petals. So that can be a nice way to get even more time out of if you have some flowers, or maybe there's some wildflowers in your garden. Yeah, so a nice thing to try with. And here are just some bowls of onion skins that you can get amazing colours from. So the normal plain old humble onion skin actually yields some gorgeous golds and oranges and some really rich warm colours. So it's a nice one to play around with. And then red onion skins, as you saw over here, can give you some really bonkers colours because we've got this like really nice neon green. This darker green is on the airfield wool, and this top one's on a white wool. So if you have a slightly darker colour starting off, so your base colour is a little bit darker, you can get a darker shade. Then on the linen, on the fabric, we've got a really red colour, so very fun to play around with. Let me think, what else do we need? Another thing that's always handy is a scissors, and I would say a tea towel is a good thing to have close by as well, just in case there are any spills, or also to use to move hot things around. And last, we need a colander and some fabric to strain your dye materials through. So if you're using something like the berries or plant material chopped up small, you don't want to put it in with your wool because you'll get little smushy berries stuck in your wool fibre. So it's good to strain that off after you make your dye bath. So that is the equipment that you'll need for your natural dyeing. Now, so I'm going to start talking you through the dyeing process using natural dyes. So when you're dyeing with natural materials, usually, or what can be very useful to you in this process, is using a mordant. And a mordant is something which allows the colour in whatever you're dyeing with, so in your plants or your spices or your flowers or whatever it is, your vegetable peelings, it kind of allows the fibers in your material or your wool to like hold on to those colors in the plants a little bit better. So there's a few different things that you can use in traditional old dyeing methods. Sometimes things like table salt or vinegar would have been used. I use something called alum for protein fibers, which is a type of metallic salt that's naturally occurring. It's mined, but you probably would have to buy it online. It's not so super easily available. The alum is just like a little salt, so you basically put it in a pot with your wool and some water, and you simmer it for about, or keep it just under a simmer for about 40 minutes. Something else that's great to use as a mordant, which is a little bit more easily accessible if you're just starting off, is soya milk. And you can use soy milk that you buy in the shop with as little additives is better, with as few additives as possible. And what you do is you get 1 carton of soya milk, like 1 litre, and dilute it with 5 litres of water. So you need a really big bucket. And then you soak your fabric in that for 24 hours and then let it cure or like set in the sunshine for a whole week before you dye with it. And that works better on cellulose or plant-based fibers. So that would be things like your linen and cotton, or if you have maybe something made of bamboo or made of hemp, the soy milk mordant works very well. But even wool will take pigments on without a mordant as well. It just kind of helps it be more light fast and long lasting. But part of the joys of natural dyes is, it's a bit of an experiment. So if you have something made yourself that you've dyed with natural dyes and it might fade a little bit over a couple of years, that's okay, because you can just dye it again. You can pick some new plants or some different things that you'd like to play around with and just do the process all over again. So it's fun. Your clothes can kind of grow with you. So anyway, these are some samples that I have mordanted. So I have some plain wool and just little swatches of linen that have been treated with the soy milk. So what I'm going to do in these little jars is just test some of these colors so that we can then decide what we want to make our big dye pot with. So I'm going to put some normal onion skins into this little pot. And I'm just going to shove them in. There. In there. And I'm going to put some red onion skins into this one. So onion skins, such a very, very basic thing, but actually you can get some really exciting colors from them. Again, just to say, that's not going to be the most long-lasting dye ever. It's called fugitive when they're not super long-lasting. But you do get brilliant colors, and you might get a couple of years out of it, so it's not the shortest either. This is turmeric powder. You could also use turmeric root. I'd say if you've ever eaten a curry, you've probably eaten turmeric. So it's a pretty common kitchen spice, and it gives such a brilliant, vibrant yellow color. And that one's really long lasting, and actually you usually don't need a mordant with it. It'll kind of, the color is so strong in it and it's so sticky that it'll want to just hold on to whatever whatever you're putting it onto. So these yellows here, these lovely bright yellows, they're actually done using turmeric. And I have some examples of turmeric here. So that's on the linen, and this is on the lovely grey wool. So as you can see, when it's over dyed, it turns this really cool, glowy, gorgeous, dark yellow color. So really fun. In our samples, I'm also going to use nettle tea bags. So you could use nettles, fresh nettles as well. Just be very careful if you're picking them that you don't get stung. And then I've got black tea bags as well. So this is a really fun way just to test how much color is in something. So what I'm going to do is pour some hot water from the kettle. So be very careful if you're using hot water. Maybe have an adult present, or definitely have an adult present when you're using hot water and when you are experimenting with any of these kinds of things. So taking some hot water from the kettle. Also, I'd advise you, if you're to use, I'm using jars, but it would probably be better to use little plastic containers if you have them at home, just because there's no risk of them cracking then. I'm putting in a teaspoon, which helps conduct the heat out. But just easier, simpler to use little plastic containers. So things that can be great for that are like old takeaway containers, or maybe little plastic yogurt pots. This might be a good thing to do in the sink as well, just in case there's any little leaks or spillages or anything like that. So I'm actually going to even shove in a couple more. You can probably start to see some of the colour coming away already. So these are like our little dye teas, like little infusions. So now, hopefully you can start to see some of the colour coming out already. And this is so fast, like this, because usually we'd say you want to steep things or boil things for about an hour to kind of see what effect that you're going to get. But because the things that we're using today are really strong, vibrant colours, we're going to see some results almost straight away, which is really fun if you're a bit impatient, which I am. Now, so this is our nettle tea, which we're getting a lovely kind of light golden green colour. So our nettle tea is this little swatch here with the linen. And then this is our black tea. So regular tea that we all drink all the time, or lots of us drink all the time, has such a strong colour. And actually, just to say as well, the regular tea has lots of tannins in it, and tannins are another chemical compound that help dye molecules affix to fibres, particularly cellulose fibres, which are our plant-based fibres. Sorry, a lot of big new words today, I'd say. So our cellulose plant-based fibres really like it when there's things like tannins present. And actually, if you are dyeing along at home, some other great things that have tannins in them that you could use as either your mordant to help the colours stick, or you could use them as a dye in their own right, are pomegranate skins, particularly if they're dried, and yeah. Okay, so we have our little swatches, our little jars here of all our nice different colours. I'm going to pop these guys in. And I haven't done it, but if you're at home, it's good to pre-wet your fibres before they go into the dye pot or into your samples. So if you're using wool, just pop it under the tap or put it into a little bowl and soak it for ideally half an hour before you put it into your dye pot. Okay? Now, so if you're doing this at home and you're testing things to dye, I would usually leave it for about 24 hours just to really get the most colour possible from it. You could even leave it on a sunny windowsill or something so that you're getting a little bit of sun. It's called solar dyeing. So they are our little samples. Nice. So from now, from here, we're going to work on our bigger dye pot, which is going to be over here, and I'm going to use blueberries for that, or frozen blueberries. For some reason, the frozen ones seem to work better than fresh ones, and they're really easy to get in supermarkets. So you're going to need your pot specifically for dyeing. I'm going to put my rubber gloves on. You should put yours on too. And we'll get going through this. So if you're doing natural dyeing in your kitchen as well at home, you're going to make sure you're in a nice, well-ventilated area. So if you can have a couple of windows open or your extractor fan on, that's great. Nice. Okay, so here I have some hot water in a pot, nothing fancy, and that has been heated up on the stove. So I'm going to pop my berries into the water. Another thing actually to mention is about the quantity that you use. So for one ball of this wool, the dry weight of it is probably about 100 grams, 200 grams, 50 grams. Okay, so one ball of this wool is about 50 grams in weight. So usually if you're starting off, particularly if you're using a nice a new dye substance. So you can see even all the color coming off those berries already. So exciting. So if you're using a new dye stuff, a nice kind of rule of thumb is to weigh your wool before you get started, before you soak it, and then use the same weight of dye stuff. Oh yeah, okay, cool. So we're gonna let this simmer for maybe 20 minutes until the color looks really brightly, the water looks really colored, and then we're going to strain it off, and then we're going to add our pre-wetted mordanted wool into it. Okay, so we'll let that sit and we'll come back in a minute. So we have our frozen blueberries in our hot water. They've been sitting for, I would say, about half an hour. So hopefully the colour has started to go into the water a good bit. Yes. So I'm just going to tilt that so you can see slightly. My berries are starting to look like ghost berries, like a little bit anemic. So they're losing all their colour into the water, which is great because that's what we want for dyeing our wool. So when you have reached a nice depth of colour in the water, or you've gotten as much pigment out of your dye stuff as you think you can, you're going to strain it off. And just like nice little rules of thumb, generally you want to boil your dye stuff maybe for half an hour or an hour. It's usually good to chop it up small if it's things like twigs or leaves. Actually, I'm going to bring this over here instead. That makes more sense. So here I have set up just a colander, a strainer with a little canvas bag inside. So you could use a bit of muslin cloth, or an old pillowcase is really useful, or any of those kind of tote bags that we all have loads of lying around. Whatever you use, it probably will get a bit stained, so just bear that in mind. And you want to have a bowl beneath your colander to catch all your lovely dye, which will be what we're using to dye our wool. And the reason that we strain it off is so that we don't end up with all the squishy bits of berries stuck in our wool, which are a nightmare to try and get out. So if you skip this step, you can end up causing a lot of work for yourself later on. Now in these little dye jars that I have at the front, they are in with the stuff, they like all in together, but because they're not boiling, it's not being agitated, so the stuff isn't kind of getting mixed through the yarn, and also we only have just very small little sample amounts. Oh my goodness, wow. So look at the colour coming out onto the bag already. So that's a really nice indicator of the kind of result that we're going to get. So what I'm going to do is just give it a little gentle squeeze, and again being very careful if it's hot, or like maybe letting it cool all the way down before you do this straining step. Maybe having an adult around to give you a little hand. And again, making sure that you've got gloves and that you're wearing old clothes. Actually, another little top dyeing tip is to always wear black clothes when you're doing any sort of dyeing work, because inevitably you'll get a bit splashed. Or failing that, maybe some dark clothes, or maybe have an apron or something you can pop on. Now, lovely, so exciting. So we have, I don't know if you can see that dripping down, we have our lovely dye liquid here. I'm just going to pop that there. So we've got a really rich, nice reddish purple colour. And what we're going to do is put our yarn into this now. So I have my prepared skein of yarn over here. So this is our airfield wool. And what I've done is just wrapped it around my arm like this, and then tied it off in little figure of eights. And what that means is that the colour will be able to get the whole way through the yarn. Because if I just popped in this ball of yarn as it is, the outside would probably get darker, and the inside it would take longer for the dye to get there, and it might not reach it as well, so you'd end up with kind of a variegated yarn. That's not to say that's not nice. Sometimes those things can be very unexpected and fun. But just as a good rule of thumb, if you kind of want the same color throughout your whole yarn, you want to roll it out, and then you want to, roll is the wrong word. You want to wind it into a skein, and then do little ties kind of every hand width apart, just to keep it from getting all tangled in your pot. So you have a couple of options here. You can either put this back on the heat, put it back in the pot, but with berry kind of colours, sometimes I just like to leave them sit in the hot water and not actually reheat them again. And then you could leave that there for, I would say, minimum an hour, but up to a couple of days, so it can cool right down in the liquid. And that whole time, all the little dye particles are going to be finding their way into the wool. So really allowing it a good long time will give you hopefully a nice strong colour. The only thing with it is you don't want to leave it too long or it'll go mouldy. So I'd say 2 days max. And to give it little stirs every so often on your way through it. Some dyes will work better if you give them a little bit of heating through the process. But for blueberries, for some kinds of flowers, I've just found that it works better not to have it heated the whole time. So you can play around and experiment. Again, this is one of the really important and cool parts about natural dyeing, is like it's about playing, it's about having fun, it's about having a little bit of an experiment. There's not so much a super right or wrong way to do it. It's more about like finding cool colors, finding unexpected colors that you can then use in your work, and it's so personal then. Much cooler than just getting dye out of a packet, I think. So, yeah, so we'll just let that sit, and then the next step of the process, when it's ready, you'll just have to imagine that this has been soaking for a long, long time, is just to rinse it out and then to dry it. I usually dry mine flat on a drying rack on a towel, a dark coloured towel. So you can see even some of the colour has started to take up already, but it will, of course, need longer than this to properly permeate the wool. Okay. Now, the next technique that I'll be talking you through is one that I find so exciting and fun. It's called eco printing, and it was sort of discovered or popularized by India Flint. So it's this really amazing technique where you use plants and roll them up into little bundles with either your paper or your fabric, using things like tin cans or maybe bulldog clips and string to make little teeny tiny parcels with them. And what happens is, because the dyes aren't being diluted by water, they're in direct contact with your paper or your fabric, you get some really beautiful designs. And actually it's a really economical way of printing as well, because for some things that might not make up a very good dye pot, like for instance if you put them in a pot with water, you get a bit of a lackluster colour. But when they're in direct contact with the fabric, they give these really detailed and beautiful prints. So you never really know what you're going to get, as well as like unwrapping a present at the end. So here are some examples that I've done. So you can see there's some really cool leaf imprints here, which are done with blackberry leaves. I have some nice ones with herb robbers. And yeah, just different nice leaves. So it can be really fun and experimental. This one was done with onion skins. So again, quite a different effect than with the just plain dyeing. So it can be some really fun fabric. Now, so we have this little print was done with onion skins wrapped up in the fabric and wrapped around a little tin and tied up. And you get such a different fun effect compared to this was onion skin done in a little dye pot. So as you can see, it's like a really different effect. I think they're both lovely, but in different ways. So this could be really cool for items you want to wear, or a fun bag, or if you wanted to work over something with embroidery, it's kind of a really cool base. And it's a little bit unpredictable as well. You never know what you're going to get. So there is an element of serendipity there that I find very enjoyable. So these are some other little eco prints I've done on fabric. This is on silk using buddleia, which is a kind of a purple wildflower that grows all over the place. And the purple gives this little yellow print, which again, really interesting and unexpected result. And these blue areas were done with foxgloves, which were actually purple. So that was exciting, an exciting one to unravel. This one was done with red cabbage. And again, it is a fugitive dye, but this has been around for about 3 years and it's still quite a nice deep colour. So don't be put off when things are fugitive, because you can still get some really cool results. This was red cabbage again, and this one was done with rose petals, and I wanted to show you this one because there are some really interesting patterns happening here. So these were red rose petals that I got after they'd fallen off the flowers. And in the print, they just gave such really cool detailed designs. So again, nice little example of how something that looks kind of straightforward and also something that's kind of at the end of its life and then can transform something and become part of your wardrobe or part of your interiors. You know, it could be a cool little cushion or something like that. So there's the examples. Now I'm going to show you what you need to get started making your own eco prints at home. So I'm going to just move these over to one side and start talking you through the process. So really easy to get started with eco printing if you are a bit find the whole idea of the mordanting and the fabrics and the special pots and everything a bit off-putting. This is super, super straightforward. You don't really need any specialist equipment or anything like that. You need some paper. I use watercolor paper because it's a little bit thicker than normal paper and it's designed to get wet and then get dry again. So if you use just like normal printer paper, it tends to tear very easily when it's wet, so it's not as suitable. You have to be really super careful with it. So I got this watercolor paper. As you can see, it's a little bit thick and it also has a slight texture, so it really wants to like take in colors. So I've cut it into little strips that I can fit around my nice little tin cans here. And I'm also going to be doing a sample to show you with a scarf, a silk scarf. So this is just silk fabric that has been mordanted using alum and also with tea, so it's got this slightly brownish sheen. So what else do you need for your eco printing? You need some string or some clips so that you can hold your paper to your tins or in a little bundle. And then you also need some dye stuff. So again, really nice way to experiment with the plants that you have in your garden. Maybe there's some plants that you have like that always make you happy, and this is a nice way that you could preserve a little part of them. So to start off, I'm going to show you on the paper. So I've cut these so that they fit nice and neatly around these tin cans that I've got. And these tin cans, they're a bit manky, they're a bit old. They do have slightly little like rusty areas. And actually those little areas are going to act as a mordant as well. So they'll help the dye move into the paper and stick to it or to the fabric. So I'm going to pick off some nice little leaves from our selection here. So I think we've got some vetch and some buttercups, very fun. And also this guy, Herb Robert, which literally grows everywhere and gives such nice prints. So would definitely recommend this one. And a lot of these things as well, like they get kind of overlooked because they grow in unexpected places and they're very resilient. But they're so useful and they're not weeds, or they don't have to be thought of as weeds. So what I'm going to do is just lay some of them out on a little page. So you can set it out in a design, in a specific design, or you might like to just scatter them. I kind of like doing both ways. So I'll do a couple of little layouts here to show you. I'm also going to take some of these petals from the bouquet that I'd frozen. They're a little bit defrosted now. So you can see there's all different kinds of flowers in there, so I don't know what way they're going to turn out. It's a bit exciting. So there's some rose petals here, and I'm just going to sprinkle these ones a bit randomly. And you can layer them up on top of each other, and you can use some of your other things that we were playing around with as well, like maybe throwing in some onion skins to get some nice bright patches of colour. What else have we got? You could open up a tea bag, sprinkle some tea in. You might also like to use some of your turmeric or any other little bits and pieces that you're curious about. So when we have our little layouts, when you're happy with them, and I would advise not being too precious with the layout as well, because you're not going to get, most likely you're not going to get like a super defined print. And also a little thing to bear in mind is that the colours will change. They're not going to come out the same colours that they are here. So go into your eco print with an open mind and a sense of discovery of like what might happen, okay? Because that's the exciting part. You have to kind of let go a little bit. So I'm going to wrap this around nice and tightly. So another important part of the eco printing is that you want like a lot of contact between your paper or your fabric and your print. So I'm going to tie this on using some garden string. You can use embroidery thread, or you could use wool, you could use elastic bands. I'd recommend not using something that's dyed itself or like has synthetic dyes in it, because those dyes might come off and then affect your print. So if you want to keep it like with the natural printing, I would say use an undyed twine. So normal garden twine is perfect. It's usually made of like jute, which is a natural fiber. And I don't know if you can see this, like these are ones that I use again and again when I'm doing eco printing, and they kind of take on little bits of the colors, which I think is kind of sweet, because then they have their own little history and story, and maybe some of the pigments from this will come off, but I don't mind that as much as like if you have a bright blue string dyed with like a plastic string, and then you're getting bits of plastic in your eco printing. Slightly different than getting like shadows of colors from plants that you've used before. So as you can see, I'm being very generous with the string here, so there's going to be a really nice bit of contact between the string and the paper and the plant and the tin. So it's going to really encourage the pigments to come out of the plant. And I'm going to move this across now to my steamer over here. And I'm going to make another couple of these guys, so I'm just going to roll this up. Another thing that you can do, which is again quite economical, is like roll up a few bits of paper together, so you can layer them and have bits of plants in between all the different layers. Or you can even just put some on the outside as well while you're tying it. And these things make such nice cards for people. If you want to give someone like a birthday card, you could use maybe their favorite flowers, roll them up, and yeah, give them a nice little print or a nice little framed print. Little thank you card or a little postcard maybe. So many things, or even like a notebook cover if you keep little notebooks. So yeah, so this is our first method. If you don't have the tin cans, or you'd prefer to keep your paper flat, you could also use a couple of bits of cardboard. So cut them a little bit bigger than your paper, put your paper in the middle, and then use these little bulldog clips or maybe clothes pegs or something to help keep the parcels nice and tight, and you can wrap string around them as well. It's useful to have the cardboard on the outside because it protects your paper from getting damaged if you just put the paper in loose. Even with the watercolor paper, it's more likely to kind of tear and rip, and also it's hard to get that pressure between the leaves and your paper, which is what you want. You want that nice pressing sensation. Okay, so I'm going to pop them in the steamer with some hot water underneath and then the lid on top. You could also either have them in your dye pot and have them submerged in the water. If you have them in a steamer, it's good because none of the dye pigments are getting diluted, so it's only the steam coming up through the paper, and you get like you can get really nice strong prints. If you submerge it in water, you can also get some beautiful prints, but they tend to bleed out a little bit more, so it'd be more like splotches of color rather than defined prints. But do play around with it, because that is the name of the game. So here I have a little scarf. I'm actually going to fold that in half, and I'm just going to sprinkle some different plants and stuff, so similar to with the paper, except this time we will be folding it up and making a little bundle instead of wrapping it around the tin. So I'm throwing on some of these whole flower heads. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a sprinkle. So again, depending on what mood you're in, maybe what type of person you are, you might like to arrange a really geometric print, so having your different colors in different lines or circles, or you might like to have everything of it all over the place, or maybe you'd like to have different colors on different sides. So for this, I'm going to go really crazy. I'm going to put loads in. So hopefully we'll get some really nice strong colors and prints in this one. And again, maybe you'd like a softer, more muted print, in which case you could go a little bit easier with the colors. And we'll also put some of these guys in, and we'll put in some of our lovely spinach from Airfield as well. Go all out. And so this one's quite layered up, lots of different colors, so it'll be really exciting to see how it turns out. So with this, I'm going to fold this in. I'm going to put some more stuff in the fold, some more of our flats. Nice. Now I'm going to fold it up again, and we'll just keep layering it up. So I can't wait to see how this one's going to turn out, because this is a combo I haven't tried before, though I've used all these materials separately. Okay, so we have a lot going on in here. So we're going to give it a nice little squish down when we've folded it up. Okay, and I kind of have like almost like a bit of a sausage roll, so it's like open at both ends and along one side. And then we're going to roll it up, okay? So we're going to roll it up nice and tight, and you could even sprinkle things in as you're rolling it up, or maybe you'd like to leave that bit plain. So I'm starting at one end and just really tightly squishing and rolling as I'm going along. And you can see, look, some of these flowers are already starting to release a load of pigment into the fabric. Nice. Okay, cool. So again, giving it a nice little squish. And then I'm going to tie it up. I'm actually going to use our Airfield wool to tie this up. And then hopefully that'll get some nice little speckles along it as well of different colours. So just like with our other tin can ones, we're going to tie it up really tightly. And this is going to encourage the colour and the plants to leave an impression on the fabric, that kind of pressure between them. And I would say use your own judgment, your own intuition here. Might be like very neat little packages, or it might be a little bit messier. That's not the most important thing. How it looks now, be how it looks later. Okay. So I'm going to tie this off so it's nice and secure. And again, something that you could use instead if you feel like this is maybe a little bit fiddly, you could use elastic bands. Sometimes I save the ones that you get on like scallions and vegetables and things. They tend to work really well. You only kind of get a couple of goes out of them though when you're steaming them. So here's our little bundle and we're going to pop this in the steamer with our little tin cans. What I'm going to do is put my hot water in the bottom. So again, being very careful when you're handling hot water and using an old pot or steamer. I'm going to pop the lid on to trap all that steam so it can really like get to work. And then that is going to simmer for ideally 1 to 2 hours before we turn it off. And then after you've turned it off, let it cool down completely. Again, ideally wait 24 to 48 hours before you look at it, but I am not that patient, so usually I let it wait like maybe an hour before I unroll them. But you definitely want to wait until it's cooled down because they get really hot after you steam them for any amount of time. And particularly the tin cans really get very hot, so be careful. And have not. Okay. Now, so I'm going to start to talk you through some of the results now. This is the really fun part where you get to see what has been successful and what you might end up using again in your dyeing journey and your experiments at home. So to start off, I have our 5 little jars where we were testing a few very common household items from the kitchen. So we have turmeric, we have nettles or nettle tea, we have our black tea, we have our brown onion skins, and we have our red onion skins. So just to say, this has only been sitting for a very short amount of time relatively. So if you're doing this at home, I would advise you waiting at least 24 hours and you'll get even better colours. But just for reference, this is our super white wool that we started off with, and we had white linen as well. So this is our one in the turmeric, and you can see it's super yellow already. How exciting is that? Lovely, like gorgeous, sunshiny, golden yellow. And that was with about half a teaspoon of turmeric. Such a fun result. Okay, so our next one is the nettle tea. Now this one I think needed a little bit longer, but you can see it's starting to turn this kind of pale golden greeny colour already. And if that's left for a little bit of a longer time, you will get these a nice kind of lovely limey pastel green. Okay, so our next one is our black tea. So regular Barry's, Lions, whatever your brand is, tea bags. And that has turned our white wool this gorgeous, rich, orangey colour. And again, this is our samples over here of our linen, the white wool and the Airfield Jacobs wool that started out grey when they've been dyed with tea. Another little note actually is just that the colours will always turn up a little bit lighter when they're dried. So the colour that you have in your thing might change a little bit, just that's what happens. So just to be aware of that. So if you see a colour that you really like, I'd say leave it in just a little bit longer to get a bit darker so that the dry colour is what you like. So this is our brown onion skins, which we've gotten another lovely yellow from compared to the white. Such a big difference. And then our red onion skins over here. So we've gotten a really cool kind of pinky yellow colour, almost like a peachy colour in our wool. And then in our little linen swatch, that's turned red. So we've gotten those two really different colours from the same dye stuff, our red onion skin. So super exciting. So I'm going to take you over now to look at our wool, which started out grey, our Airfield wool again. And that's been sitting in our blueberry dye pot that we made earlier on. So look at the gorgeous colour that is turning. So compared to the grey wool, we've got this gorgeous purpley kind of colour. And again, if you're dyeing at home, I'd say leave that sit in the dye pot for 24 hours, maybe even a little bit longer, so it can really soak in loads of colour. But for even just a short time, that's after taking up an amazing colour. So really excited with that one. And then over here, we'll have a little look at our eco prints. So again, being super careful, wait till they cool down. Use your gloves, use your tongs, use your adult to give you a hand. That's what they're there for. So now, it has only been a little short time, but I think that we might be lucky and be able to see some cool results already. So now, can you see some of the orange is already coming through here? So nice. And I'm just going to untie these little bows that we made. You can use a scissors to cut your string off, or if you have the elastic bands, you've got a really easy job just undoing them after your tin has cooled down. So now look at those cool colours. I'm going to unwrap this now. So in this one we had our different petals and we had our onion skins. You will have some little bits stuck to your paper, so just gently brush them off. They go a little bit slimy. And your paper is quite fragile at this stage because it's wet, so be careful. So look at that, how fun! So some really fun colours there. Couple of bits of advice: if your paper is a little bit curly when it comes out, press it under a heavy book between some kitchen roll or a towel just to kind of flatten it out, and then leave it to dry on a drying rack. But yeah, we have our other little one here. We'll give it a quick look. Again, waiting till it's cool, waiting to letting or getting a little bit of help here if you need it. Wow, look how fun! Our little leaf prints. And you can see our buttercup here has left a gorgeous little impression. This is herb Robert. And we had our spinach in there as well, so really fun. All the bits are still stuck to the pot, to the tin. And our last little one, I'm going to give it a bit of a squeeze. There's loads of colours coming off it already. So this is our fabric that we tied up with our Jacob's wool. I'm going to give it a quick little unravel. And we'll see what we've got. So again, really letting these sit for a day or two helps to get the most out of whatever the plants that you're using for the dye. But for the purposes of this showing you, we'll just have a little look now so you can get a bit of an idea. And this should just be a little bit of inspiration for your own jumping off into your plant dyeing your plant dyeing experiments. So again, being a little bit careful. It's good to do this out your back garden if you have a back garden, because all the little bits are going to fall off. Wow, look at our fun colours. So just a reminder, we had our onion skins in here, we had our herb Robert. We didn't even sprinkle in any turmeric or anything, it was just some of our little plants from over here. And our onion skins, and we've got such amazing colours. We had our spinach. No, ooh. So hopefully you can see some of the fun patterns here. And again, this will be a little bit lighter when it dries, but such gorgeous fun colours. So yeah, just showing you the possibilities of some plants that you would have been getting rid of otherwise, maybe an old bouquet or some things that might have been considered weeds. So have lots of fun having a little play around yourself. Thank you so much for coming along today and for joining in the workshop. I hope that you have enjoyed yourself as much as I have. And if you are feeling inspired to try out your own experiments at home on wool or paper or anything else, please do share your photos with us if you'd like to, because I would love to see your work, we all would. So yeah, if you would like to have some more information, we have a lovely activity sheet on the website that you can check out. And also, if you want to upload your images to the digital scrapbook, we'd love to see them. So thank you again so much, and do let us know how you get on.